It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial complex in all of its random creation. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. We missed a week where Chris and I had a communications faux pas, but we are back and glad to be here. There's a ton of news, man. What's going on in your world?
Not much. Back from a recent vacation, so I don't know if I'm rested, but I'm ready.
I told you when you came on, you look kind of tired, so I think you're still making up some hours.
Yeah, I was just in Iceland over 24, 40 hours ago, so I'm still 4 hours ahead, but whatever. I'm ready to roll.
You're just like a military guy, man. You're having to adjust all these hours and everything.
Yeah, it's easy. Although I'll say a quick aside. One of the countries I was in was Ireland, and they have some bizarre localized sports. So I would say, yes, so, soccer and cricket, just put those over to the side, right? So they're their own thing. But the next three popular sports, one, horse racing is still huge. So if you're wondering, like, a place where horse racing is still a, kind of a legitimate sport 12 months out of the year, not just like 6 weeks out of the year, Ireland, which I found pretty interesting. Two, something called hurling. Have you ever heard of this, Steve?
That hurling? I have not heard of. What's hurling?
So it's kind of like a weird cross between lacrosse, field hockey, and ice hockey. Really the kind of a cross between lacrosse and field hockey. Big deal there. And then here's one. Have you ever heard of Gaelic football?
I have heard of that, but I can't place what it is.
So I was talking to a cab driver in Dublin, and I said, "What's that stadium? It looks like a pretty good-sized stadium." And he goes, "Oh, that's where they play Gaelic football." I'm like, "What the heck is Gaelic football?" So he said it's basically, most of you probably, especially if you're of a certain age where, ESPN would just show random sports at odd hours of the day, you've probably watched some Australian rules football in your time.
Yes.
I think it's similar to that. I think it's similar to Australian rules football. So it's a little bit like rugby plus rugby with field goals.
The drunker version of Australian rules football.
And to underline that point, it's an all-volunteer league, and they still get 40,000 people in a stadium to watch it.
All volunteer meaning they're not paying anybody?
The players are not paid.
And they're just getting beat up for free. Oh my God.
So, you go to these places and, obviously the big sports everyone knows, and, those are regionally different. But I was fascinated by some of these like more localized phenomena.
I don't even know what to say that. You get beat up for free. I mean, do they have medical insurance perhaps?
He said that the prize money goes back to the league. So there is some kind of prize money, but all of the money gets siphoned back into the management of the league, which means I think I would guess there's some kind of, injury insurance or something, I would guess at that point.
At least, you know. No, see, nobody in America would do this ever.
No.
Not one person would volunteer for something like this for free. People love football right up until the time they say, go get beat up for free. Then it's not so fun anymore,
Yeah. And it's like similar to rugby and Australian rules football where there's no pads.
Yeah, if you ever played rugby, it is brutal, man. It really is. I mean, yeah. That's the most. I think that's the most Irish thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, Gaelic football. So in fact, I bet you if we put Gaelic football on TV in the off season, it might perform better than these baby American football.
It'll do better in the XFL after week 5 or whatever we're up to.
It would certainly be a bigger novelty.
It would be, for sure.
Well, speaking of novelties, the story that has rocked all of the sports business world, and certainly the National Football League, and certainly those with Washington area rooting interests or hating interests, it seems, Steve, that we are close to or getting near, or at least flirting with an end to the Dan Snyder era in Washington. So I know that you and Alex did an emergency pod, but that was a couple days ago. We haven't heard too much more, but some particulars about where they are exactly are starting to emerge.
Yeah, I warned Alex that the emergency pod does not need to be done because I knew last week that things clearly weren't done, which was kind of the point. But Alex is all excited. So where we are, so we are recording this on Monday night, and where we are here is that Little Danny and Josh Harris and his minority partners have reached an agreement in principle as to the purchase of the Washington franchise for 6.05 million. And what this means to me is probably last week they had like a term, they had agreed to like a letter of intent, a term sheet or something along those lines. Um, so what has happened since then? So that was Thursday, and that was the source of the Alexi's panic. Oh my God, it's happening. But many things have to happen. One, the NFL Finance Committee has to go through it. Well, one, they have to reach an agreement and sign it. Two, the NFL Finance Committee has to go through and evaluate Harris and his partners and their finances and all of that stuff. That takes a while. And then it has to get out of the Finance Committee and then get to the league for a vote. So Monday night, we have now been told that this tentative agreement has in fact been sent to the league for the league's approval. Now, this means the Finance Committee is going to do their thing. What this doesn't mean is that Danny couldn't just set it on fire today and go with another deal. This is not an exclusive option. This is not an agreement is done and signed and it's going to close in 2 weeks. That's not this at all. So now the Finance Committee has it. I would assume that Josh Harris will not take very long by NFL standards to be evaluated because they already did this once with him. Last year he was a losing bidder on the Denver Broncos sale. So they've already been down this road with him once. So when I say investigate, what they're really primarily doing is his finances, his business ties. What they don't want is to have somebody who's broke pretending to be rich end up being an owner, because then that puts them in trouble with banks, and then that would make the NFL have to possibly bail teams out and, foreclosures and bad things. So they want to make sure the guy's legit. So that is in process of going on. It certainly means that we're rounding third, I think, probably, but that does not mean it's done, and I think it's going to be a while. So that's kind of the basics of it. Let's go there first with your reaction, then I want to get into Brian Davis later. And
yeah, no,
everything else.
I would agree with that. It's clear, the analogy that I've said is, if any of you have purchased a home, first you go into contract. Sometimes those are exclusive contracts. Sometimes the realtor still has the right to show it and take counter bids. But there's a whole process in between, entering contract on a home and then, doing the closing and getting the keys in the handover. So to me, we're at that in contract stage. Paperwork is flying, all the various due diligence things. And, it's, I think, best case scenario, that means you're like 4 to 6 weeks away from a close, where we get that sort of metaphorical handoff. I mean, that's if all things go as
in the very, very best case scenario.
Yeah. And then you get the metaphorical handing off to the keys. And I think everyone should, save their ultimate excitement when the Josh Harris group or whoever is sitting there holding the keys and everyone's waving to Dan as he exits on his yacht. Until then, I mean, it's a huge step. I agree, rounding third. I get the excitement, and I think we've jumped a level of seriousness here. And I also think that the sale is going to happen. I actually don't think there'll be some like 12th hour Dan Snyder shenanigans. I think he's going to milk and squeeze every bit he can and make it painful. But I think this is going to happen. And I think probably to the Josh Harris group. But, that's not a given.
That's not a given. And as someone who has done certainly hundreds, probably thousands of transactions, generally speaking, like this. My expertise goes more towards real estate than corporate transactions, but I've done a lot of these for a long time, and yeah, and sometimes if it's an asset that is hot enough, they'll just cut out all the due diligence and make you do it up front, and then say if you sign this thing, you're agreeing to all of this, no matter what, and you're locked in. But even in that scenario, it takes a few weeks at a minimum to close. Even in a scenario like that, and in this case, certainly the limiting factor is that it has to go through the NFL Finance Committee, like I said. Then it has to be voted on by all the owners, and that takes time. So nobody's fantasy is this going to be done like in a couple weeks. That just isn't going to happen. I do think that while our skepticism was warranted in the beginning, Dan's going. Dan is going to go. I think there's no doubt at this point that this is going to happen. So in terms of so Rick Snyder, like late last week, in one of his little YouTube videos that I watched, he said that Steve Apostolopoulos, I think is how to pronounce it.
I think that's pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Contacted him personally and said, "I'm not out of it," or words to that effect. Rick said this in one of his videos. And I'm assuming this is like 12th hour scrambling to find some new bidders, tighten up some financing, whatnot. But that seems to be a way, way, way long shot. Brian Davis, listen, it's an absurd story, okay? I don't know how you feel, Chris. The whole thing is ridiculous. There's not a former basketball player that has $7 billion in cash laying around. Now, understand, when you do deals like this, when we say cash, that means the guy literally has $7 billion in equity laying around. $7 billion in cash somewhere he's going to wire to Danny. Almost 99.9% of deals like this are done with some combination of cash and then a ton of financing. Even Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter, had to come up with tens of billions of dollars of financing for these things, because even Elon is not sitting on a Mount Everest-sized pile of dollar bills somewhere, okay? So I find it extraordinarily difficult to believe that a guy I had never heard of before about 3 weeks ago is worth tens of billions of dollars and can just write a check for this. I think that's absurd and ridiculous. And furthermore, if you dig into him a little bit, there are stories of other people and players and claiming he's wronged them financially and all this. So I think he's a fraud. I think he's probably a fraud. And anybody who's rooting for this, I think, needs their head examined.
He's like the zombie bidder, right? He just won't die. He just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And did some of the details in this current one are just insane. With the idea that they would pay $1 billion down, and then 7 days later, the $6 billion would come. They would pay. It's
I see that apart. If you were going to pay an all cash bid, think about it like, to use your house analogy. If you're going to put 20% or 10% down on your house, and have it held in escrow, by a title company, you could have it held in escrow by Bank of America. That part isn't so crazy. It's the idea that he has the $7 billion in the first place.
Well, that's what I mean, and that you would just, here's it this Monday, and by next Monday, trust me that I can scrounge the couch,
exactly,
for the other $6 billion. I mean, it's just wacky. And then there's also a claim in this offer. Now, this is being reported by the junkies have sort of been on this rumor.
There have been 2 or 3 places, yeah.
And then it's some local media, I think, that is mostly this story from like the last 24, 48 hours. There's also that he's going to give Dan full indemnity. That's another. So not only is he going to get $7 billion in a week's time, cash on the barrelhead, he's also claiming to give Dan Snyder the magic wand. I mean, what magic bag is this guy pulling stuff from?
That, and by the way, he's bidding $1 billion over the next highest bid. That's billion with a B, because that is a ton of money. So that is what, 15% markup?
Yeah.
About it's And 15% markup, maybe when you're talking about like a used Chevy, isn't quite so much, but we're talking about $1 billion. That's crazy. So I think none of this is real. This is it's this guy is having a cocaine-induced fantasy delusion or something to the extent he really thinks this is valid. It's not. It's crazy. The team is going to be sold to Josh Harris. I'm convinced at this point. I think Steve Apostolopoulos. Um, I think he's legit, but I don't think he seems like he doesn't have the money. Otherwise, he would already produce it by now. So that's the end of that. And Bezos. I mean, I know we got to get into Bezos. I never thought, Chris, that Jeff Bezos was a legitimate bidder for a lot of reasons. And I think it turns out I was right. I think you thought the same thing. And one, I tell you, you go into the Seattle bit, Chris.
Well, we talked about this, and this has sort of been my conjecture that the Seattle Seahawks sale is his real target. It's his hometown. It's Amazon's main corporate head space. The fundamentals, which we should circle back to this in a second here too. The fundamentals in Seattle are just way better. They have a great stadium. They have a fervent fan base. They've got a track record for success, and they have a good football infrastructure. So, of course, he's more interested in that. And then people said, oh, but he was interested in DC, the Washington Post, yada, yada. If you're paying attention, they've actually started to shutter plans for corporate headquarters for Amazon in DC. He's contracting his interest in his footprint in DC, not expanding it. So I think, and I actually don't agree with the people that think the NFL want to keep him out. I think they'd love to have him as an owner. They'll figure out all the other stuff about, the TV contracts. There's ways to get that sorted. And I think they want him to own Seattle. But Peter King in his Football Night in America, whatever it's called, it's on NBC, it's on Pro Football Talk, his latest column did have a tidbit about, and Steve will be able to explain this a little bit better, but there's actually a tax reason that Paul Allen's sister, who is a controlling interest of the Paul Allen financial empire and is the owner, it doesn't behoove her to sell it before May of 2024. So there's, but at the same time, everyone knows May 25th or whatever it is, 2024, it's going up for sale. So I never thought that Washington was he where he was going, and quite frankly, in that scenario, it doesn't do him any benefit to even come in and bid and just put up what might be the next price, which if we talk about the valuations of these and what kind of assets these two franchises are.
Why is he going to bid himself up?
Right, exactly. He's not going to throw another, $250 million onto this deal so that he ensures the next one is 7.
Yeah. So I think what's going on, and this is found in what Pro Football in Peter King's column. And so what this says is, if the team is sold before, we're talking about Seattle here, if the team is sold before May 2nd, 2024, 10% of the sale price will go to the state of Washington. Now, that's not really so much of a tax. That is a contractual provision. And my guess is that this is something in the stadium deal that says, if you sell the team before X date, then you owe us money. Why would the city do this? Well, because a new owner tends to do things like new owners potentially do things like move teams to other parts of the country or demand new stadiums because we're new. Look at what Stan Kroenke we talked about this 6 months ago or so. Stan Kroenke was in $1 billion, as in 9-figure lawsuit, 10-figure lawsuit with the city of St. Louis because he moved the Rams to LA in breach of their local stadium agreement. And so that's what this is an incentive to keep the team in place longer so there's not a question of the Seahawks leave. That is what it is. So it's not really a tax. It's like a clawback, liquidated damages thing. So yeah, look, Bezos never made sense for all the reasons Chris said. And he never acted like he was interested. Okay, he hired some marketing company to look into it. Big deal. I mean, business guys like to do that all the time. It's not, he probably wanted to see the the team's records so he'd have a go by when he buys the Seattle record. It doesn't mean anything. So Bezos is never really in it. And I
It
think
also was pretty. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just say I think all you guys out there who are rooting for it is because this is the name of a billionaire. That's it. Period.
And I think if you look at the leaks, all the Bezos might still be in from the last couple of weeks is really just there as Snyder Camp leveraging, trying to squeeze
Desperately
Josh Harris.
trying to squeeze him out with more money. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear if you just see where the leaks were coming from, who was getting those scoops. It always rang false to me. And if you're a Washington fan, to me, the Josh Harris group with the Magic
better.
And the Rails brother guy, it just that you don't want. That's the one you should 100% be rooting for. It's the most. It is the sensible, practical, professional, adult way forward for Washington ownership.
They're professional. He's a professional owner.
Yeah.
Look, Jeff Bezos has a million things going on all over the place. He's in the news. It's politics. It's all of this. He brings drama, okay? He went through a divorce worth billions of dollars. Amazon rules the country practically. He's in charge of Thursday Night Football. That brings drama. I can't speak to this Steve Apostolopoulos guy. Who knows? But I do know that Josh Harris is a moderately successful owner of two other professional sports teams. And yeah, I think 100%, Chris. I think that's what you root for. Now, there's a couple of interesting things in that have come out here tonight. This is an article in The Athletic, if you can get that, by Daniel Kaplan and Ben Standing. Washington sale, it's Commanders. I hate to use that word. Sale agreement sent to NFL includes indemnity provision for Snyder. Now, I have written thousands of indemnity provisions, literally probably thousands, and there are lots of different types and levels of indemnity. Okay, there's full blanket indemnities that say no matter what you do, I'm going to pay for your damages. There's you're going to pay for my damages even if I screw up damages. My guess is that this is some sort of partial indemnity where he's indemnifying Dan to some either financial or legal limit. This is not going to be like an unlimited Dan Snyder is totally off the hook for absolutely everything level of indemnity. Every deal like this has some level of indemnity in it. So this doesn't surprise me too much that he's getting something. I would be very surprised if Josh Harris is indemnifying Dan for personal misconduct, like personal sexual misconduct of the type that like the Mary Jo White investigation has. If it's ever proven that he did feel up some cheerleader at dinner, that kind of thing, those kind of things he's not going to be out the hook for that. I'd be really surprised if he was, but it's not that big. It's not that big a deal. There's an indemnity provision in a $6 million contract. That's just, I don't think it's anything anybody needs to get their shorts all wadded up over.
I agree. I thought there were two interesting tells last week that sort of that really kind of were precursors to this sort of, I'd say, jump in seriousness towards a sale. And that was one, the sort of like Bezos telling whoever, I'm officially out and just put an end to that. And then two, when the team settled the deposit lawsuit in Washington, in the district, because that was, let me settle my debts here, like whatever horse trading was going on about what they were going to be indemnified for, what the new owner was going to want to pay for, willing to pay for. I think that, and Snyder is very litigious. He wouldn't, if he wasn't going to
he's not going to settle something
he's not going to settle that. No. So to me, those two things happening, it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It was very clear, like those two things were setting up the pins. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple other of those, like cleaning up these small legal messes here. And then they're probably negotiating which ones fall on which side of the sale.
Yeah. I had the same exact thought, because the exact thought as you did. This is not the kind of thing Dan Snyder settles. we did this story again like a year ago. Whenever it came up, I thought it was a weird nuisance lawsuit. Then I still think that now. 600. It was $200,000 in settlement money, or 250 or something, and like 400,000 in fines. That is nuisance value. Doesn't sound like it for regular people, but that is basically a nuisance value lawsuit. And so it's clearly what happens when you have major transactions is part of the due diligence is to investigate liabilities. Okay, so if you're selling your team and your team has a bunch of open lawsuits, well, that depresses the value of the team, because me as the buyer comes to you and says, look, dude, you have all these open liabilities that I'm going to be responsible for because the team is being sued. So either we're going to reduce the price substantially, or you're going to go out and get rid of them. And so this is Dan getting rid of them. And there's a couple others. It's like Virginia is looking into something similar. It's hanging around. So that didn't surprise me. And I did think that was a sign. I think you're 100% right about that one.
Now, this brings up an interesting case. So we talked about around this issue, I just want to take a second and say, and whether it falls just short of 6 billion or there's clawbacks or whatever, like whatever we end up, right, it's going to be in the neighborhood of 6 billion with probably a couple creative ways to get you
probably
to 6
so
billion.
Yeah, it's probably some options, and
yeah. But let's for the sake of cleanliness, let's say 6 billion. One, considering the Denver Broncos less than 2 years ago sold for 4.8, I believe, I think Seattle isn't going to be less than 6 billion. In fact, I think it probably starts to cheat closer to 7. But we think about both those franchises, and we've said it, I believe this, the fundamentals of a team in Washington. But it's amazing that a distressed asset, to the degree in which the Washington team is going to sell for a record amount. And I just find that, no stadium, worst practice facilities, no brand, disconnection from its history, horrible on the field product, almost no fan base left, no iconic merchandise. Think all those negatives, and it still went for $6 billion.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. That's why I've been wondering this entire time. What I think you and I, when we did a prediction like when this started. And I was like in the 5s, I think, because for the reasons you're saying, all of those problems, how does this happen? How does the value of this franchise go up so much? Clearly, so the stadium is wrapped up into it, okay? He doesn't have clear fee simple title to the property. There's like some kind of reversion to back to Prince George's County in this. And I couldn't get the records because I didn't want to pay Prince George's County to have them send them to me because the state of Maryland's stupid. So I couldn't get them for free. But he doesn't have clear title to that. And I don't understand, for the reasons you said, like Seattle has a solid stadium deal in place, even if they don't own the stadium. Clearly obviously the city owns the stadium. But they sell. They have success. Their fans love them. They have positive support. Marketing is better. How does the price go up 1.2, 1.5, whatever billion it is in a year? I really don't understand. It's Dan Snyder failing upward again somehow.
Yeah, no, he's going to get, it's quite a golden parachute. It really is amazing. And it speaks to the value of these teams and the value of the market. I understand. I can make the case about why it's still highly valuable, but you got so many problems to fix. But you know what? This is another reason you should be rooting for Josh Harris, because, and he's probably going to sell some minority share, I would guess, to get us a stadium. But he bought, as a leader of the group that bought the Sixers for only like $280 million. And, the Phoenix Suns just sold for $4 billion, right? So
yeah, I don't know how that happened either. Goodness.
And so the Sixers, he's his own little mini Dan Snyder in terms of what he's done in his investment in the Sixers. And one thing to watch is does he put up any minority shares of the Sixers here to finance a stadium?
Maybe. Look, stadium deals. He's not going to shell out $2 billion in cash for a stadium. Okay, that's not how any of this works. He's going to have to put up 20% of it, maybe. he may have to put up a couple $100 million, and then probably finance the rest of it. And I think, I mean, if he really goes all out, you could get into a couple billion. But if he's reasonable, you could get a stadium done for $1 billion. Depends on what you do and where it is and all of that, of course. But let's just, for the sake of the argument, say it's between $1 billion and $1.5 billion, maybe. He's going to have to put up a couple $100 million. And by the way, so while Chris was talking, I got on my standard loan calculator website that I do a lot of loan valuations for, plugged in a $4 billion loan with a 30-year term at 6% interest. And would you care to take a stab at what the monthly debt service is?
No.
It's $24 million a month.
Wow.
That's a hell of a lot of money, And so then if you take 23 bill, let's do some more calculating. 23 million times, that's $276 million a year in terms of just debt service alone. And so that, kids, you know what that tells you? Prices are going to go way up. Merchandise, ticket sales, all of that, because that's a lot of money even for an NFL team. It's a lot, and that's spread out over. That's not all on Harris. That's $4 billion is probably roughly what the group total is financing, would be my guess. So, but that's a hell of a lot of money, for sure. But so stadium, I think one of the things that the media and the fans alike all thought was that Jeff Bezos would have the best chance of getting a stadium done at the RFK site. I do not think that's the case for many reasons. One, I don't think Bezos, and I credit Dave Earl for mentioning part of this on the last Hogstye emergency thing we did. I don't think Bezos has the political ends that everybody thinks. Don't forget that the RFK site is owned by the federal government and leased to DC, and the lease is for another 10 years or something. Don't quote me on the number, but it's something like that. Maybe a couple years more. Not enough time to build another stadium, and they don't have authority to do it. So the federal government would have to consent, either sell it outright or another long-term ground lease. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the local residents don't want it at all. They want something else done there, not a stadium. But I don't know if every billionaire is connected, man. There's no run-of-the-mill billionaires. And I don't think Bezos is really plugged into either the Democratic or Republican Party particularly well. He's kind of this weird libertarian that, he's not like a hardcore Mitch McConnell lunch guy or, Chuck Schumer lunch guy. He's not either one of those. So I think Harris would probably have as much pull as Bezos would. But more than that, I think it's a very difficult sell to get anything done at RFK for anybody.
And this is where I think, I agree with all that. And I think this is where the Mitch Rails partnership is actually pretty key. I mean, this guy is local, has built an empire out of there, got, self-financed a weird art museum that he now lets people go to for free, he knows how to do big capital projects in the area. So I think that's, I think he's as much obviously he helped to finance this thing, but I think he's the firepower there. And honestly, Josh Harris is actually going through the exact same thing in Philadelphia right now. He wants out of that sports complex area in South Philly where all the stadiums are, and he's playing game of chicken with the city of Philadelphia on a downtown stadium.
Yeah, and let me also, I said this on Hogside, but so for those of you who didn't hear it, Magic Johnson's role in this is professional cheerleader, okay? He is, for those of you who don't know, owns a very, very, very small piece of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He put in, I think he said $50 million. The Dodgers sold for, with plus the stadium, something like $2 billion several years ago. So he's got, what is that? That's 1% would be what, 20 million? So he's got 2.5% of the Dodgers. But the Dodgers had an absolutely toxic owner, Frank McCourt, who is another podcast another day, but he was Dan Snyder level of toxicity or worse. Chris knows a little bit about him. Magic Johnson came in. Nobody knew who Stan Katzen was, who's the principal owner of the Dodgers. Magic Johnson came in as the hero, $1 million smile, 1,000-watt smile, hero of the city of LA, came in and talked to the people during the sale process and said, we're going to win. I'm here to save the day, all that. And then once the sale was over, he kind of faded away. So I would think that's probably what's going to happen with Magic. Again, he's not as much of a hero in DC, but he's still got the charisma and all of that he has. He's a well-known celebrity. I think that will be his role, and then we'll never hear from him again.
Oh yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And welcome. Like I think they could use that. Apparently, he might be in for as much as 250 million.
Oh, really?
Yeah, here, but
That's still a 10%, 5% maybe.
Yeah, it doesn't change the math that much.
No, not at all.
All right, we should move on to our next story, but obviously there'll be many more opportunities to talk about this. Hopefully, as we get closer to a sale, and hopefully when we've got clarity, the keys have been passed. We'll probably have some, conversations about what they're actually going to do. And stop looking backwards and look forward. But kind of some weird, interesting developments in the unfortunate death of Dwayne Haskins has emerged as the family of Dwayne has sued. Is it sued the driver of the car?
Well, they sued a couple people. So recall last year, right around this time, April 9th, Dwayne Haskins was killed down on a freeway in Miami when he was apparently trying to cross a freeway and got run over by a car, tragically so. And it really seemed like an odd thing to happen, obviously. Who's walking down the middle of trying to cross a freeway? And none of it really made any sense. And so then some of the facts that kind of came out is apparently he ran out of gas. He was walking down the road. Then we find out that his blood alcohol content was allegedly up to 0.2, which is very high, twice the legal limit, in most jurisdictions. Reportedly had ketamine in his system, so he was out of his mind. Tragedy. Well, so last week, the lawyer for the Haskins family put out a bizarre statement, and it went into some level of detail. I'm not going to read all of this necessarily, but he does mention that it was a dump truck hit Dwayne. He said there was a lot of lights around. He should have been well seen in all this. But the really, really odd part, I am going to read. This is from Rick Elsley of the Elsley Law Firm, PLLC. As to what occurred in the hours before Dwayne was killed, many questions remain unanswered. It is believed that Dwayne was targeted and drugged as part of a blackmail and robbery conspiracy. In fact, his highly expensive watch was stolen from him shortly before his death. That is freaking weird, and that's next level conspiracy stuff. So the article that I'm looking at right now is from CBS News Miami, dated April 10th. Family of NFL quarterback Dwayne Haskins files a lawsuit over deadly I-595 crash. It's attributed to CBS Miami team. So in here, they have sued the dump truck guy individually, who hit him, but they've also sued a bunch of other people here too. So they've named the owners of the truck, Sorrel Enterprises. That's not surprising. They named the Department of Transportation, the Florida Department of Transportation, as a defendant. They've named the contractors who were doing construction, because remember there were construction signs around there. That's not even the weird part. So all that's pretty normal. Here's the really weird part. The lawsuit claims somebody named Joey Smith, Carly Payton, Wissal Yassin, and Miriam Yassin committed battery on Haskins by blackmailing and robbing him, causing him or contributing to cause him severe injury and death. They've also named the Wyndham Hotel, Boca Raton, and something called the Drive Shack, which is a golf driving range, and then a Blue Anchor pub. All of those people are named in this lawsuit. This, ladies and gentlemen, is truly, truly throwing every everything against the wall and hoping something sticks. But they are alleging, basically, I have not read this pleading yet. They're basically alleging that people were after Dwayne Haskins. They drugged him for whatever reason. He presumably had to drive away, and then he got run over on the freeway because there was construction on the freeway, which caused him to be hit. That's kind of the story. It's straight out of like a bad CSI novel or show.
Yeah, no, it's very bizarre, and there was something in it also said that they had evidence so that like 6 other trucks were able to avoid him.
Oh, I skipped that part. Yeah. That part was. They said that because there's all these lights and constructions around, there were lots of lights on him because he was, don't forget he's walking down the middle of a freeway, okay, in the center lane of a freeway. And he said a lot of other trucks and vehicles around him, because he was lit up, were able, and there people had their hazards on, were able to avoid him. But this one dump truck just basically crashed into him. They're implying, without saying it, that this was an intentional act of some type. That's what they're really implying here.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, how much validity this is, or do you think that they're just? I mean, I'd be really curious to see what evidence. Yeah.
Well, think about this. And now, I'm no full-time litigator, but I did litigate for 2 or 3 years in my early days as an attorney before I realized I didn't want to do that. I don't want to be the one to go. Here's the jury argument. My client, Mr. Haskins, rest in peace, had a blood alcohol content of 2.0 and was high on ketamine and was walking down the middle of a freeway. But yet, please blame this dump truck for hitting him. Does that make it? Is that something that a jury would ever buy? And if they don't have evidence of this conspiracy, and robbery and all that, even if they do have it, what does that have to do with him walking down the middle of a freeway on alcohol and illegal drugs? That's a really bad argument to make.
Right. That's why they have to come up with this like weird, fantastical story about being roofied.
Yeah, I guess. Basically, they roofied it, more or less. I mean, is ketamine roofies? I don't know if it is,
no,
but yeah, basically, that's sort of what they're saying. And so they're kind of saying these people drugged him, and that caused him to go out of his mind and walk, because the reason he was on the freeway apparently was he ran out of gas. And instead of just making a phone call and calling AAA or anybody else, his agent, he starts walking. But because he's out of his mind, he got hit. And why was he out of his mind? Because these people, drugged him in this weird conspiracy thing. And so they're trying to excuse his conduct, but it sounds ridiculous. Unless they have serious evidence of this, the whole thing sounds absurd, frankly.
Now, so, I mean, can this just get thrown out on cause at some point?
Well, sure. I mean, of course. I mean, they could file a motion to dismiss. But listen, there's so many parties, though. One or two of these parties probably will get a dismissal. Probably. But I think it's highly unlikely that a trial court judge is going to throw the whole entire thing out. Because, for one thing, there is a factual scenario. There's a factual question to answer. When things get thrown out, it's usually for legal reasons. You're not alleging a proper cause of action. Okay, judges very, very, very rarely will throw things out that are supposed to be evaluated by a jury. So, was Dwayne Haskins' conduct reasonable? The fact that he was would the ordinary reasonable person be walking down a freeway? Probably not, but that's still something for the jury to evaluate. Have they made a legitimate claim? Is there any basis whatsoever for these people? There may not be for some of them, but the idea that all of this is going to get thrown out, I think, is not realistic.
Wasn't he reportedly talking to his girlfriend or wife when it happened?
Yeah, or shortly before then or something. I don't know if the allegation was he was literally on the phone when he got hit.
I wonder if that conversation gets what's on that, if they have that. I mean, they obviously have that recording somewhere.
I don't know if they do obviously have that recording somewhere.
Yeah, I guess I'm just assuming all the telcos are.
I don't know. I mean, are they recording our conversation? I mean, I don't know if that's true in any way, but they could certainly pull up phone records and prove when he was talking to her. But listen, I mean, is the dude really walking down the center lane of a freeway on the phone I mean, I don't know. That it's obviously these people are grieving, and I'm not trying to make light of it. You know, they lost their husband, brother, friend, family member, and that's tragic. But this lawsuit strikes me as absurd in some
Yeah.
respect,
Well,
in many respects.
going to even more absurd is we love to check in on our friends at the WWE. And, Vince McMahon, just a couple months ago, he was ousted by his daughter. He dated somebody in the company, sexual misconduct, a big dog and pony show. Then he comes limping back, and now he just signs a new 2-year deal.
You called it, Chris. You called it immediately. You said this is nothing but. I forget the word you used. But you said this is nothing but another WWE like storyline. I think is
Yeah,
what you
he's just
said.
a heel turn is
Yeah,
what.
there you go. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So this is. So we went over this story, and we all thought this was a stupid story, and all of this. Well, CNBC published April 1st by Lillian Rizzo. Vince McMahon locks in 2-year contract as WWE looks for buyers. And there was a companion story to this where they're actually partnering with a UFC league to market themselves together to get, more, media coverage or TV coverage. But so this thing says McMahon would be open to leaving WWE for good in the event of a sale, meaning that if you want to pay him a few more $1,000,000, he can go away. If the other, the new buyers are tired of him or whatever. But I mean, if anybody out there ever thought that this was in any way nothing but a completely fictionalized story, you're hopelessly naive. Just
Yeah,
hopelessly naive.
yeah. Pro wrestling is always just like a silly version of whatever is in the headlines or whatever is in the
And
kind of
Vince McMahon
culture
has
at the
been in the
time.
middle of it for like 30
Yeah,
years.
even
He's
longer.
been a
Yeah.
part of this key part of the stories for literally decades.
And do you think he's going to have any shame about casting himself in some kind of like pseudo cartoon Harvey Weinstein? No.
No, of course not. He's practically done that for years. He's been
Yeah.
the Harvey. He's made a big deal about having a bunch of women around, and his family members have been in the story. Is it the daughter? I forget who's
The
been the
daughter,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, the daughter has been in the middle of it. I do think Vince is probably legitimately running the company. That part is true, I think. And he's in his like mid-70s by now, so it might not be a lie that he's willing to just retire if somebody wanted to. If they could really sell the asset for some huge price, he might just take his ball and go home, possibly. But all of this is just, and it worked too, by the way. It worked. He got a ton of attention. You told me, Chris, I don't know if you have in front of you, but you told me
I
they've had
do.
great ratings. Why don't you go into the
It's
ratings?
not. I was wrong on the ratings, or it's not a rating story. But so if you wonder why they're basically retaining him, yeah, both behind the scenes for real and in front of the cameras, is their SummerSlam 2023, which will be in Detroit in August 5th. Um, is already sold 32,000 tickets, and we're 4 months away from the they went on sale last week. This article is from today, and according to the Sports Business Journal, the WWE has sold more than 32,000 tickets, were distributed on the first day of public availability. This is the largest day one sale for any WWE stadium event outside of WrestleMania in pro wrestling, WWE's history. So, for a non WrestleMania event that is still 5 months away, they sold 32,000 tickets in the hours after they opened the sales line. So,
In other words, half of Ford Field sold out in less than 24 hours.
yes. So they're doing something right. Vince McMahon is doing something right. So if you read between the tea leaves, then you see, this guy has been steering the ship successfully for decades.
Well, don't forget that this is coming on the heels of new media contracts. We did this story too, like I
Yep.
don't know, a year and a half ago, maybe something like that. They cut new deals. What was it, Fox? I think
Fox
it's
and
Fox.
Peacock, I think, both have.
Yeah, I think so.
broadcasting
I think
rights. Yeah.
Peacock has all the rights to the old film footage and stuff, all the old IP, and then Fox has got a show on Friday nights that's I think doing fairly well. And so he's done well with it. I mean, wrestling's not my thing. I think it's not my thing. It's not sports. But be that as it may, it's highly successful. And I just have to laugh at all of it. I really do. I just think it's funny that anybody believe this garbage. So let me do real quick the other part of this. There's a couple things. One, we did the story a while ago about the betting. Remember, maybe Alex and I did. Were you gone for that, Chris? The betting
No,
story.
yeah, I found the story, but then it was on an episode that Alex filled in for me. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the story was that the WWE is trying to convince a couple states, Michigan, Colorado, and Indiana, to allow legal betting on WWE. Now, of course, WWE is fiction, remember, and so there was a story from a month ago now that I've been holding that the states of Indiana and Colorado both said, no way, no how is this ever going to happen in our states. And Michigan said, we haven't even been asked. So there will be no. Here's the quote from Colorado. Colorado, this is the quote from betting on WWE matches in FW, say gaming operators and regulars by Contessa Brewer. And so Contessa is quoting Colorado. Colorado regulars aren't happy about the prospect even being floated. This is the quote. The Colorado Division of Gaming is not currently and is not considered allowing sports betting wagers on WWE matches. At no time has any state gaming regulator in Colorado spoken to WWE about including waivers on our approved wager list. And then the state of Indiana has said something similar. So that part is silly. And then the other wrestling news that came out of this also, if I can find it now, here we go. I mentioned this before a few minutes ago. So, there's been a merger. The Endeavor Group's UFC is about to merge with WWE into a new publicly traded company controlled by, of all people, Ari Emanuel. And so Vince McMahon remains on as executive chairman. So his contract's going to be doing that. But the point here is to bundle together some UFC. I don't know what UFC that is. That's obviously not Dana White's UFC, but it's some UFC. And so it's just making a more appealing package for everybody. So there's a lot of wrestling stuff going on right now.
Is this? I'm looking this up. Is this the same Ari Emanuel, the talent, the famous talent agent?
I think it is. Yes, that's why I said. Yeah.
Yeah, which he's made famous as the Ari on
the HBO
Entourage.
show from Entourage. Yeah.
Is based on him.
Right. That's that guy.
He's brother to Rahm Emanuel. So
he was in the Biden or the Obama administration, correct?
Yeah, and then it was the mayor of Chicago, I think, for 2 terms.
Yeah.
And was a congressman from Illinois as well. So yeah, kind of a strange family, but that would be hysterical. So if that is him, that is a name that has bounced around Hollywood for a while.
Yeah. So keep your eyes out. We're going to keep our eyes out on this to see the continuing saga of Vince McMahon in wrestling. But again, I think the whole thing is hysterical.
Well, there we go. Steve, I imagine you're tracking the football parts of the sale, and you guys are very excited to talk about the Jeremy Reeves signed as tender, right?
I just saw that right as we were about to come on the air. So, I mean, it's a good move for Washington. So the news we have is that Rick Snyder has moved his whole operation to a paid area of YouTube. Apparently, there's some kind of paid YouTube subscription you can do with him. So, I mean, we've parted company with Rick, but it's been on great terms. He's a friend. Encouraging if you want to listen, please go do that. But Seasons of Discontent will be there for a paid fee as opposed to on our site from now on. And for our part, the Hogstye continues on. We are getting into the heart of the draft and whatnot, and we have all of our regular written content.
All right. Well, there you go. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.